The first thing that you have to know is that I'm not saying that there are good kinds of books and there are bad kinds of books, because that's just false. But I am saying that there is a weird interplay between writers and readers going on right now that I find problematic. And so what's going on is that we as readers seem to be less and less conscious of what we're reading. We seem to be wanting more and more to just escape. And I don't think there's any problem with that. I mean, I read Harry Potter from starting like in the third grade and just read and read and read to escape from the world. I mean, to, and something about Harry Potter just was so endearing and just made you fall in love with it. And I'm sure many people who are listening to this have read Harry Potter, loved them, and agree with me. And I'm not saying that escapist type fiction like that, where like you read it because you want to escape and get away, is I'm not saying that that's bad. I am saying though that we as readers and also we as writers need to be very aware of what we're reading and what we're writing. So the direction that popular fiction is taking today is going away from like the real meat and potatoes of what fiction really is. And we're coming toward more of this fireworks, action, adventure, romance, just flashy, showy stuff, right? Because fiction is actually its potential is to get at more of what life is really about, because fiction has the ability to use flashy, big, showy stuff to show us what we're missing in life. Let me give you an example. The dystopian and uh, alternate realism or alternate reality, I can't remember exactly what the term is, but it's a form of dystopian fiction. And the point of that genre is to show us here is something in society that needs to change. And it doesn't necessarily give us like proposals. It's because it's not a proposal, but it's just showing us this is what society could be like. And this is why we need to avoid it. This is a bad place to be in. And sometimes it shows us like how we got to that point. I'm thinking specifically of 1984. 1984, we had all this Big Brother, right? Um, they were spying on everyone, and the main character is just terrified that he's going to be found out, that he like reads books, and that he like, you know, from the very beginning, he's just terrified. So, 1984 is showing us that we have to be very careful about like societal control and like vigilance over individuals. And we also need to be very cautious of technology. And although technology has the potential to be a really good positive force in the world, we also need to be very cautious about how we're using it. That's just one example of a dystopia that is showing us the potential of where society could go. Another one is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. It's another one that was super popular. And I'm mentioning these because they are popular, because people know what I'm talking about, right? Handmaid's Tale became a Hulu series for several seasons now or something. And then she wrote a second book. So The Handmaid's Tale is all about, I mean, there are all these dystopian elements that are flashy and they're big and they're exciting. But the meat and potatoes of what it's really about, the real concept for her, I think, is women's rights and what it means to be a woman and what it means to be free as a person and as a woman. It's all about womanhood and the unfortunate direction that life is, or like society has gone and could potentially still go, in reference to women and women's rights, women's freedoms, and so on and so on. And Margaret Atwood has been a very, very just proficient writer in including these kinds of genre elements like dystopia or horror, etc., and putting them into uh, a message for the world, right? So that we understand that, like, yeah, this type of society that is described in The Handmaid's Tale is not what we want, and so we have to be careful about it, right? Another example is of someone who is able to write that way is actually Stephen King, especially his early stuff. Um, like, yeah, the first 20 years, I guess, of his career, he was writing mainly about, like The Shining, for example. That was written as a way for him to describe his fears surrounding his alcoholism. He was afraid that he was just going to go crazy and, start axe murdering people and running around crazy eyed, and he was afraid of that, and is one of the motivations for him to face and fight his alcoholism. But he also has a kind of dystopian sort of like element to it as well. I'm not talking about, like, he's not using the dystopian genre, but he's using the meat and potatoes that is often used in dystopia. Because there's almost always in almost all of his stuff, there seems to be like this zealously religious woman who is like in Carrie, for example. Carrie's mother is this religious zealot who's just out of her mind, right? And if you've read his short story, The Mist, or Mist, I can't remember. I think they've made like a 2-hour movie from that, and then I think there's also like a series, a TV series on Netflix called The Mist or Mist. Um, and in both of those, I'm pretty sure there's this crazy religious zealot who's just like sacrificing people to the creatures that are in the mist that they're all trapped in, right? So for him, that's sort of like his way of showing that this problem that is in society, which is usually a dystopian thing, right? But he puts it in horror as well, because dystopia and horror are often can be similar in that way, where there's some problem in society that's happening that's causing this horrible thing to happen. Um, it's not necessarily a common trope of horror, which is one of the reasons why he is the king of horror, um, because he's able to do that. Zombie horror fiction often does that as well, where there is a problem in society that has caused this thing to happen, or anyway. So for writers and for readers, we need to be aware of what we're consuming or writing, creating. Are we going after something that's trying to be like something else? Or are we creating this flashy, interesting, genre-based story that's just explosions and flying metal people and aliens and magic and werewolves and vampires and no substance? Where is the substance beyond just the romantic, or beyond just the in like the 1800s they called it sensationalism is what they called it, and they all wanted to avoid it, which is why there really wasn't like genre fiction back then. If they had something that was like horror based, it was almost always accompanied with an element of realism along with it to kind of ground it. Like Dracula by Bram Stoker, for example, that one is written as if it was being written in journals. It's like these are journals and like clippings and like real things that actually happened. so that we as the readers don't think that, oh, it's just sensationalism. It's just this, like, some guy flying around in a metal suit. Seriously? Like, some guy flying around with a giant hammer that, like, is electrocuted, like electrocutes people? Like, really? In that kind of fiction, it's there's not as much. And I when I'm not criticizing Marvel. I'm not saying that that is all that it is. I'm saying that we have to avoid making that all that it is. Because Marvel has actually done a really good job of putting a little bit more substance into their characters as compared to, like, some of their very first stuff that we know of. Like, the first Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr., for example. Um, he I mean, that moment at the very end where he's like, push the button. No, but you'll die. Push the button. You know, but you'll die. I mean, just, if I was that actress, her playing that role at that moment, I would just be thinking, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm saying this in this context." Like, you know. But compare that to Endgame, when Robert Downey Jr.'s character sacrifices himself for everyone. Which is a very, that just really pulls at your heartstrings, and it's a powerful moment for that character. And so they went from this flashbang Iron Man thing to this self-sacrificing Iron Man doing things for the greater good. And but anyway, um, I'm looking even beyond that, like, even beyond just these amazing character moments that some of these stories are able to create. We're looking more into, like, what is it like to be human? And sometimes the sensationalism that we see in Twilight or Harry Potter or Divergent or Hunger Games or whatever, or even Handmaid's Tale, can get in the way, or Stephen King's anything can get in the way of what they're really talking about, the real meat. So that is the problem with fiction today. It's moving away from the meat and potatoes of what it really means to be human, which is actually, ironically, it's exactly what fiction is trying to do. It's trying to get us closer to reality instead of further away. And so if we're reading or writing to pull ourselves or people or everyone away from reality, I mean, there's plenty of great stuff out there, like the Divergent series or the Hunger Games series, that's designed to do that. I mean, it's designed to be this fun, or, nerve-wracking story that just pulls you out of your life for a little while, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we have to remember, as writers and as readers, when we're creating fiction, that we need to make the kind of fiction that has those meat and potatoes. We need to make that popular by liking it, by reading it. And one of the ways that can help do that is to, pick up some of the fiction that is designed to do that. It takes all of the genre elements right out. There's no horror, there's no dystopia, there's no sci-fi, there's none of that. And it's all just a fictional story about fictional people showing us what it's like to be human in a very real sense and very special, artful way. And we can do that by reading short stories from, like, the O. Henry Prize stories for that year, for 2020. Right now, the 2021 won't have come up yet, but or the look it up, O. Henry Prize stories. O. Henry was a really good writer, and there's this whole selection process for uh, literary fiction that was written in that past year. They'll contact all kinds of publishers, and they'll try to get, like, the very best based off of certain criteria. And the best American short fiction, short story, when it's called short stories. So the best American short stories is another one. Well, they'll contact, like, tons and tons and tons of people, and they always have a guest, like, editor who compiles all these and decides out of all of these entries from all of these publishers, which of all of these is going to make it into this year's issue of the Best American Short Stories. So read some of those, and they are heavy and they are difficult to read. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's showing us about what life is supposed to be like. It's bringing us closer to actual reality. Some of them are dealing with really major, serious things, issues, and there are no genre elements. It's not the normal fiction that popular fiction readers think of, right? Like us. I mean, we don't think of, people dealing with divorce and death in the family and trauma and that sort of thing in our regular genre type fiction, right? So reading some of those and really appreciating it for understanding that this is showing us what life, I mean, this is giving us the rawness of life, like just cheese grater across your skin type raw. I mean, just raw and bleeding. And then when we go into the more popular fiction world where there are more genre elements, we can take things like Margaret Atwood or Stephen King or George R. R. Martin. I mean, Game of Thrones has all kinds of really interesting um, elements true to life in there. It has all kinds of genre elements as well, tons of stuff there. But we as readers and we as writers need to be thinking about the more substantial elements and not just the escape stuff. We can enjoy the escape stuff, but we need to think of the whole picture. So that's the problem, really, with popular fiction today. Writers who are trying to be like someone else, who are trying to be sensational or just trying to make bucks or trying to publish, and readers who are just trying to escape the world, trying to get away from what it actually is, rather than occasionally, and it doesn't have to be always, because that kind of fiction writing, I mean, that kind of stuff is really heavy, it's really dark, very hard to read. But at least we, as readers, we really need to occasionally, especially readers trying to be like writers, we occasionally need to dip into that difficulty. And so that's the problem with popular fiction today, is we're not willing to dip into the difficult. So learn to write like writers. I mean, read like writers and dip into the difficult. And so that's it for this time, and I'll see you in the next video.